Hello and welcome to this online lecture on the final stage of the origins of the Holocaust. This is phase 3, and also this lesson builds on what has been covered so far in phases 1 and phases 2, plus a little bit of information in the very first lecture on anti-Semitism and how it started to develop in Germany, and how the Nazis started to take anti-Semitism down a much more violent route. That is also relevant to this overall question or topic area of trying to determine, what ultimately were the reasons for the way that the Holocaust emerged. By the time we get to phase 3, we are now looking at the actual beginnings of the Holocaust. This is when the mass killings began. We haven't really saw that in phase 1 or phase 2. We saw legislation passed, we saw persecution, we saw violence, we have saw Jews being killed, we saw examples of incarceration in concentration camps, although that was temporary. But now we're moving on to the horrors of the Holocaust itself. So we're going to look at what I refer to here as Operation Barbarossa and the invasion of the Soviet Union, and with the invasion of the Soviet Union we get the annihilation of the Jewish people. The interpretation or viewpoint that we've already kind of touched on from Lucy Davidovitz, this intentionalist historian, is that war with Russia, although she just talks about war in general, war with Russia, what is sometimes referred to as total warfare, this war of annihilation, was basically twofold. So on the one hand you've got the conventional war of trying to defeat the Soviet Union, who were seen as being the kind of ideological antithesis of Nazi Germany. And at the same time, the other aspect of the war is not about just defeating the Russian military, but also to exterminate the Jewish population of Russia at the same time. So they're the two kind of factors that the Nazis were interested in this kind of ultimate battle, right? This is what Hitler had always kind of aimed for. Even in Mein Kampf he spoke about the desire for Lebensraum, and Lebensraum really just was one particular place. There was land in the east. That means the old territories that obviously include Poland, but also the Baltic states of Lithuania and Latvia, Estonia, and all these other countries that were part of the Soviet Union as well. That is where there would be German expansion and ultimately German settlement. So the intentionalist view, I guess, would be that in 1941, with the invasion of the Soviet Union, this would be the perfect opportunity to engage in real violence against the Jews, and your opportunity to wipe the Jews out is much more likely to be achievable during warfare, during this total war, because the eyes of the world are less likely to be focused on what is happening when a world war is underway at this point. So that is the intentionalist view, and we'll come back to it on a number of occasions today. The structuralist view is obviously going to take a slightly different interpretation, and it's all really about dates and timings in this final phase. And just to maybe sum this up, right, and I've kind of listed some points here, but just to kind of give you an idea of how the two historical interpretations differ from each other. The intentionalist school, based on what I've just said, would argue that the decision had already been made to exterminate the Jews prior to the 22nd of June 1941. So 22nd of June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, right, the invasion of the Soviet Union, that is the signal for the extermination of the Jews in the new territories that Germany are going to invade. Right, so that's the intentionalist view. The structuralist view is different, right? They say that there was no premeditated plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe at that point. So that when war breaks out, there are Jews that are killed along the way, but this was not something that was planned. This was something which was a byproduct of circumstance and byproduct of the conditions that the German military faced as they were advancing. Although I should say it's not the German military per se that carry out the exterminations of the Jews. the killings are actually carried out by another organisation called the Einsatzgruppen, who we'll talk about in a moment. And the structuralist view is that it's not until a little bit further down the line in 1941 that a final decision to systematically kill the Jews of Russia is actually taken. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on. Now, I guess a concrete example would be useful, right? So our starting off point is going to be a concrete example, and it's an example placed on the map actually. In fact, let's just look at the map. It's to do with pages 51 and 52, which are in this handout here. Right, this is from the historian Martin Gilbert. So I want to kind of focus in on this information in 1 second. Just to give you an idea as to the area that we're talking about at the moment, the example you're going to see links to Einsatzgruppen B, and the area is the Einsatzgruppen B were responsible for is kind of what we would now call the country of Belarus. And the example we're going to focus on is this little place here called Brest, sometimes referred to as Brest-Litovsk. Okay, now you can see that the German military are going to advance from here. This is the beginning, this is Operation Barbarossa, this is June 22nd, right? So you can see why in the very first attack on the Soviets that Brest is going to be one of the first towns or cities that the German military were going to encounter. Now the Einsatzgruppen, who are referred to up here, A, B, C and D, they're given different locations up and down this eastern front that they have to engage in. And what I mean by engage in is, and you'll see this is quite a useful little animated map on My City that you can look at for phase 3. And there's also a documentary that you're going to watch which focuses on the different Einsatzgruppen and their atrocities. Now the Einsatzgruppen, I should say, are controlled by the SS. They are not part of the German military, so the Wehrmacht, right, or the German army. They will engage with Soviet soldiers, defeat them and advance, but in behind the Wehrmacht, in behind the German army, will come this Einsatzgruppen, right, this mobile killing squad. And it is their job to liquidate potential threats to Germany. So as Germany now takes control of this land, who could be the threats? Well, the argument initially was there could be communists in this area, they're a threat, Soviet kind of military, they have to, like the kind of top military, they have to be liquidated. Maybe as well local politicians, anybody within the community that may have influence, they have to be liquidated. And that was the job of the Einsatzgruppen, right? We're not talking about that many members of the Einsatzgruppen initially, right? There's maybe only, you know, a few thousand of them. So the idea that they could completely carry out the extermination of millions upon millions of Jews in this kind of brown area, it seems a bit far-fetched, right? Because the German military, although they give support and assistance for the extermination of the Jews in Russia, they are not carrying out the atrocities themselves, right? They're focused on defeating the Soviet Union. Let's jump back to this source and focus on this, as I said, this kind of concrete example. I'm going to read through this example from the historian Martin Gilbert. He talks about the very date that we are interested in, which is the 22nd of June 1941, and we're talking about the town of Brest, right on the border between where Nazi Germany was and where the Soviet Union was, right, when they divided up this kind of part of Europe. So if we scroll down, you'll see it says here, when the Germans attacked Brest on the 22nd of June 1941, the Russian commander that day of the town was on holiday, right? So he'd been replaced by a Jewish officer, a Jewish Soviet officer called Yefim Moiseyevich Fomin. He is wounded during the shelling of Brest. He was denounced by locals once he had been arrested. It happened to be that he was a communist commissar, right, so a member of the Soviet army, but he was also a Jew, so he was executed. But you know, if he'd just been a communist commissar, it is likely that he would also have been executed. The interesting thing is what follows it. It then says the fate of the Jews of Brest was like that of the Jews in every town in the area of the German advance. And what we're really talking about here is the first German advance. It says in the first days, individual Jews were shot at random. That would suggest nothing is systematic. Then in the first week of July, 200 Jewish men were seized on the streets, imprisoned in the fortress in Brest, tortured, refused water, and then were killed. Right? If we scroll down here, and then shot. One of them managed to escape. A week or so later, right, so we're now, what, 3 weeks in since Operation Barbarossa has begun in June 22nd, this is July 10th. A larger scale action takes place. 6,000 are rounded up and taken to an area that has been prepared, if you like, for a mass shooting. 12 large pits have been dug, and these Jews were killed, right? We know some of the names of them, they're mentioned here. And now we're talking about women as well being killed. And that is, I guess, the kind of initial story of what happens to the Jews in Brest in the immediate aftermath of Operation Barbarossa. Now, in the autumn of 1941, a ghetto was then established. So this idea that there had been a premeditated plan to exterminate the Jews, you could have argued that that kind of could make sense, right? If the Einsatzgruppen, and if the Nazis had basically carried on the extermination process, but they don't, and 20,000 Jews of Brest are rounded up and sent to a ghetto, and they stay in this ghetto for a full year, right, from 41 to 42. This is much more like what's happening in Poland, where Jews have been sent to ghettos, and where Jews have not been shot in the way that Jews have been shot, or the 6,000 Jews that were shot in Brest. These Jews will be killed, right, but they will not be killed until November 1942. Now, November 1942, the Holocaust is well underway. By this point, we have got extermination camps in Poland, right? We've got Chełmno, we've got Sobibor, Majdanek, Belzec, Treblinka, and Auschwitz. And then, you know, the Holocaust is definitely underway, but it doesn't appear to be a systematic process in place, or a clear decision has been taken to exterminate the Jews, if 20,000 have been given a kind of reprieve. Now the question the, I guess, intentionalists would start to think is, well, these Jews are it's not so much these Jews are being kept alive because you know, there's a future for them in this part of the world. There's not, right? The idea from intentionalists is this is all going to be German territory. Jews are not going to live in this territory unless the view was you're going to transport these 20,000 Jews elsewhere. And we know that also the Madagascar plan had been touted, you know, by this point. You know, what else are you going to do with the Jews? The intentionalist perspective really here would be the Einsatzgruppen didn't have time to exterminate, didn't have the time to, you know, mass murder a full Jewish community, because they had to move on and then help consolidate the position of the German military in the next phase of Operation Barbarossa. So, you know, they've done some damage, they have ghettoised the remaining Jews, and eventually, once the war with the Soviet Union has been won, I guess the intentionalist view is, well, then the Einsatzgruppen will come back and finish these people off. And they are finished off, as you can see, right? They were eventually taken to a mass execution site at Bronagora, and were murdered there. So I guess intentionalists could find some way of explaining why this was not a systematic, full-on extermination of the entire community of Brest. The structuralists would say, wait a minute, there is no plan, and that is why these people have not been killed. It's a difficult one, isn't it, to make sense of, because 6,000 were systematically rounded up and murdered, and you know, they're some of the first victims of the Holocaust, if you like. Anyway, let's move on and look at another example. The other example we're going to look at is linked to a place not that far away from Brest, a place called Bialystok, and here we're going to look at the work of a historian called Christopher Browning. We'll touch on Christopher Browning, or you will more so when you look at the My City information. But within Christopher Browning's book on the origins of the Holocaust, there is a chapter dedicated, or a chapter given over to another historian called Jürgen Matthias, and he gives his interpretation of what he thinks was the Nazi approach to the Jews in the period of Operation Barbarossa and the months after it. And Matisse, I guess, falls into the category of structuralist historian. Browning is a moderate structuralist historian as well. And I'm just going to read through this little quote, and I'm going to take you to an extract from Matisse himself. So it says, in June 1941, a solution to the Jewish question was still envisioned by the German leadership in terms of forced resettlement, that though inherently destructive, so if you take Jews and you place them somewhere else, that's going to be destructive, people are going to die in that process. He says that there was no plan in June 1941 with Operation Barbarossa for systematic murder of all Jewish men, women and children. Precedents set in the early weeks of the Barbarossa campaign would prove to be crucial in the turn to systematic and total mass murder. So what Matisse is saying is there wasn't a plan, but then the way things worked out during the early weeks and months of this invasion of the Soviet Union, that would eventually lead to systematic mass murder. But it would support the structural school, right? Because it's not this idea that it had always been the plan, right? Which is what intentionalists say. Intentionalists might even go as far back as we know as Hitler writing about Lebensraum and Mein Kampf, or Lebensraum appearing as an ideological concept in the Nazis' 25 points. Or some more moderate intentionalists might just go back to something like Saul Friedlander, who we'll look at soon, might just go back to earlier in 1941, where they might say, well, there was some planning for how the Jews might be dealt with, because the Nazis had already came to the conclusion that an invasion of the Soviet Union would be destructive, and there was a kind of discussion about what was known as a hunger plan, the Nazis' hunger plan, which would be an engineered famine, because as the German military invade, they were going to have to feed themselves off the land, and that would mean confiscating foods from locals, and in the process, Soviets would die. And it was estimated that millions of Soviets would die, tens of millions of civilians would die of starvation. And we know that the Soviet Union do suffer greatly, in terms of war deaths. And this was all part of what was known as General Plan Ost, right, or General Plan East, which would be the ethnic cleansing of Eastern Europe. So I don't really see, if you take an intentionalist view, I don't really see any place for Jews living in this area after the invasion of the Soviet Union. So the question is, do the Nazis have a grand plan somewhere else they're going to send the Jews? Or have they already accepted that this is going to, invasion of the Soviet Union is going to lead to the mass extermination of the Jews? So the intentionalists are already thinking that the plan must have been in place, and Matisse kind of rejects that. He says no, there's no evidence of that. Once the war is underway, once Jews start to be killed, then the plan emerges. Now this leads us to another key part of the debate that you must refer to in an assessment on this topic, and the other key part of the debate is who's making the decisions. Now, the intentionalists also think Hitler's making the decisions, a top-down approach, and therefore everybody will know what is expected of them at that point when the invasion of the Soviet Union takes place. But Matisse disagrees with that, right, and he gives us an example. He talks about two places, right, so he says the mass murders in Garsden and Bialystok. Now, interestingly, when you read the work of Daniel Goldhagen, another historian, he talks about Garsden, so you will get a bit of information on what Goldhagen says. This is Garsden's in Lithuania. So I'll come back to that in a second, but the mass murders in Garsden and Bialystok in late June, according to Matisse, structuralist historian, reflect most of what an old historian, Raoul Hulberg, has called the first killing sweep, right? And he says in this first killing sweep, the perpetrators used the image of the enemy and the pretext of retaliation, and if you don't kill the Jews, they'll retaliate against you, to legitimise the selection and execution of undesirable persons, primarily Jews, without waiting for specific orders from above. That's really key, right? So on the ground, these Einsatzgruppen who have been sent in to, as I said earlier on, deal with potential opponents, anybody who might be a threat to the Germans as they advance, they're in there to liquidate them, not necessarily to kill the Jews, according to Matisse. But some of them do start killing Jews, and therefore they have done so without specific orders from above. It says, if the murder of Jews on occupied Soviet territory did not result from a preconceived master plan, as intentionalists would argue, the sequence, speed and scope of the killings must have been connected to regional factors and the dynamics of ad hoc decision making. Right, so why is it that in some areas there are large executions of Jews, but in other areas there are not? In fact, as we've seen in Brest, there's a stay of execution for 20,000 Jews. And what Matthias is saying is that in some areas there's a desire to kill Jews, in some areas there's less of a desire. What might be the factor leading to it? Well, remember in Eastern Europe there is high levels of anti-Semitism, right? The Nazis don't have to do that much to encourage examples, violent examples of anti-Semitism. So in Lithuania, in the Ukraine, in Latvia, in Estonia, the local population there are, for a number of reasons, anti-Semitic, and they are given some encouragement. Sometimes they're given lots of vodka and from the SS, and maybe see what happens once they start to round up Jews and abuse them. And what we see is that at a local level, right, or regional factors, as Matthias says it, we get Lithuanians murdering Jews. You'll see this example, a real tragic, horrible example in the documentary that I want you to watch. It then says that men from different agencies, the security police, the Wehrmacht, the order police, interacted. So again, on the ground, we are seeing interaction. And just to go back up a line again, right, which I probably should have mentioned, it says ad hoc decision making meant that traditional elements of hierarchy lose their importance. Ad hoc just means decision making as to what to do with the Jews is taking place on the ground by those who are there, kind of making things up as they go along. The authority to inflict suffering and death on civilians became detached from military ranking status, with lower and middle ranking officers taking the initiative, where their superiors provided support, encouragement, or ex post facto legitimisation, i.e. once Jews have been killed, superior ranking officers would say, oh yeah, I agree with what you've done. In this way, the limits of what was regarded as acceptable in dealing with selected groups within the civilian population were expanded. Therefore, the argument really that Matthias is putting here is that it's not necessarily something that's coming down from the very top, from Hitler or Himmler. This is brutality, this is murder, these are executions that are taking place for whatever reason, partly because of the anti-Semitic views that are now held by these Einsatzgruppen, although not all of them were kind of lunatics, not all of them were genocidal maniacs. Some of them even were ex-social democrats who just joined the police force. Why are they killing? Why are some of these men killing Jews? It's quite difficult to truly understand that if they've not been given a clear order from above. But that is the structuralist interpretation. Just go to the other side of the page, we get an example of kind of inconsistency, if you like, of what's going on. And Matthias refers to two police battalions, Police Battalion 309 and Police Battalion 322, and they're just like this little different kind of regiments, if you like, of Einsatzgruppen B. And what we get here is two kind of different stories, right? So it says, hours before Himmler himself would arrive in Bialystok, Police Battalion 322, that's part of the Einsatzgruppen, had looted the Jewish quarter. They took out 20 trucks of food and other supplies, but did not massacre the Jews, right? However, Police Battalion 309, days earlier, had done so. In fact, the three persons shot by Police Battalion 322 were Poles, they weren't even Jews. So the question is, why the inconsistency? Why is one part of the same Einsatzgruppen killing Jews and the other is not? For structuralists, this suggests that a top-down decision had yet to be made regarding the future of the Jews. Now, why is Himmler there? Right, Himmler does turn up. Himmler apparently complains about the small number of Jews arrested. Even if that is the case, right, if Himmler thinks that there should have been more aggressive action towards the Jews, the very fact that he's not saying, I ordered you to kill more Jews, you should have killed more Jews, again might imply that no decision had been made. Now, could this have been a trigger You know, could this have been what triggers Himmler to say, well, we need to intensify the killing of the Jews? Is Hitler responding to what he sees on the ground, or is he responding to Hitler? Is Hitler giving them orders? We don't know, but I think the kind of lack of clarity of a plan, a premeditated order given, would suggest here that maybe the structuralist argument has something going for it. Now we're now going to talk a little bit more about this. So that's very much the structuralist interpretation I've given you. We'll come back to the structuralist interpretation before the end of today. The intentionalist interpretation comes partly from Davidovitz, partly from Friedlander, who we're going to look at in a minute, and also partly from Daniel Goldhagen. And we're now going to look at an example of killings. Well, before we get that, I should say, Christopher Brown's wrote loads of books on the Holocaust, but one of his most famous ones is called Ordinary Men, right? And it looks at a police battalion in the very start of the process of Operation Barbarossa. It looks at the final solution in eastern Poland, and he comes to the conclusion that again decisions appear to be being made by ordinary troops without any orders on the ground, which would again suggest that Hitler is not central, at least initially, in the decision-making process for the Holocaust, and therefore Browning's structuralist interpretation would be that the Nazis stumble into the Holocaust. You know, what do you do with all these Jews when you want to take this land yourself? I can see why people would criticise that, because you might think, well, the Nazis always planned for Lebensraum, they knew Jews lived here, they must have known that there was no place for Jews in this territory. Third kind of point was, did the Nazis' success in Russia lead to extermination? I.e. the Nazis were kind of surprised by how quickly they were defeating the Soviet army. So whilst that was happening, they kind of thought, well, do you know what, we may as well do, you know, real work while we're at it. We're defeating the Soviets easily. Let's use our resources also to exterminate the Jews. Again, speculation more than anything else. I want to talk a little bit about Saul Friedlander and Daniel Goldhagen. Now, Daniel Goldhagen is what you might call an extreme intentionalist. He blames the entire German population for the Holocaust. And Goldhagen writes about something which is known as a kind of stepwise plan, right, or what he refers to as a kind of stepwise implementation, right? You can read about this in My City. And Goldhagen's view is that there was never a real doubt that the Jews were to be killed. They were always meant to be killed, and the reason for the kind of lack of clear decision making, according to him, is that Himmler, getting obviously authority from Hitler, Himmler was of the view that murdering women and children would be quite difficult. So the view was, you don't, this is the advice given to the Einsatzgruppen, you don't have to kill them all. You don't have to do it all at one time. You know, stepwise, bit by bit, get you used to killing Jews. Almost a kind of, habituate yourself to the murdering process, because, you know, killing people close up in front of a ditch is pretty difficult. And that's what I guess intentionalists say, is that this could not all happen at the one time. That would be overwhelming, not for the people who are being killed, overwhelming for the killers, and therefore these inconsistencies are going to exist all across the Eastern Front. Eventually, as the months develop, it will become easier to carry out these attacks. The reason why intentionalists argue that local killings took place, so Lithuanians killing Jews, Ukrainians killing Jews, is because the Nazis really encouraged it, because it would mean they wouldn't have to carry out these atrocities. So that's one of the kind of key things that you should read about. You'll get this, as I said, page 148 to 153, the bit about, you know, step-by-step killing definitely supports the intentionalist argument. And Goldhagen focuses on this place called Garsden, which is on the Lithuanian border, and it's interesting because that's the exact same location that is being examined by Matthäus, and they both come to different interpretations of what has actually went on. But what I want you to do is now look at the work of Saul Friedlander, who is an intentionalist, but he is more of a kind of moderate intentionalist. Friedlander thinks that the decision to exterminate Jews had been already taken prior to Operation Barbarossa, so that's where he differs from Browning and Matthäus. He's not saying that Hitler had came to this conclusion, 20 years beforehand. So we're going to we're going to have a little look at some quite difficult sources to read actually. This is a bit, we're going to focus on a place called Bielka Zerkov, which is in the Ukraine, and this example is one in which we're kind of moving on a little bit. It's early August 1941, so Operation Barbarossa has now been in existence for close to 6 weeks. There are still some inconsistencies in the killings that are taking place, right? So on the 8th of August, a section of the Sonderkommando led by SS Obersturmführer August Hafner arrive in Bielka Zerkov, right? So again, to keep things simple, we're really here talking about the Einsatzgruppe and not the military here necessarily, but the Einsatzgruppe and the Nazis, but also the Waffen SS, who are the Nazi wing of the army, right? But let's not overcomplicate things. When they arrive, they round up Jews, they murder the Jews, right? Now that might seem like, yes, the Holocaust is underway. But they don't murder children. In fact, there's a group of children under the age of 5 who have just been abandoned, right? They've not been killed by these Einsatzgruppen. And they've no food, no water. They're in a building on the outskirts of the town. It tells you this up in the top left hand corner. And they're just kind of left to their own devices, right? 90 children. And it says the screams of these 90 children became so unbearable, right? Their parents have all been murdered, their older siblings have been murdered. The soldiers decided to call in the chaplains, right, a Protestant and a Catholic, to take some remedial action, right, to discuss what was the kind of issue. And the issue here was that these kids what should you do with them, right? I mean, they're in a horrible state. These kids are covered in flies, lying in their own excrement. Some of them are trying to eat, get water off the walls. They are basically, close to dying. The question is, right, in August of 1941, why have they not been killed? I know it seems like a really harsh question to ask, right? But from a Nazi perspective, why have they not been killed if the intention was, the complete extermination of the Jewish people? You can't have Jewish kids growing up because they want revenge on the Nazis. It was always the view, who's going to look after them anyway, right? What we get, I'm not going to read through all of this, right, but you want to read through these pages in your own time. You then got all of these Nazis, right, colonels, because the military are actually involved in this one, colonels, members of the SS, all try to decide what to do with these kids. There's one guy who kind of sticks up for them, right, a guy called, when I say sticks up for them, he's not a hero, he's a member of the military called Helmut Grosskopf, and he tries to delay the killing, and eventually what happens is that a decision is taken that these kids have to die, right? And the reason why they have to die is because of the kind of ideological understanding of what was expected of the SS at this point. And it's mentioned here, Grosskopf writes a report, and he says Riedel, says Colonel Riedel of the Waffen SS, he attempted to draw the discussion of the kids into the ideological domain, and he says the elimination of Jewish women and children was a matter of urgent necessity, whatever form it took. Now, the fact that Riedel says this, member of the SS, suggests that he is very clear in terms of what is expected of him and his unit, because orders you might think have now been given, and then anything that Grosskopf tries to do to possibly save these kids is denied to him, because everybody just follows what Riedel says. And then you kind of get the story, right? I mean, the story of it's pretty. This is, by the way, this is evidence from the trial at Nuremberg at the end of the war. It says on August 22nd, so exactly 2 months after Operation Barbarossa, these children under 5 were executed. The final sequence of events was described by Hafner, who was there. I went out to the woods alone. The Wehrmacht, that's the German army, had already dug a grave, suggesting some form of complicit behaviour by the German military. The children were brought along in a tractor. The Ukrainians were standing around trembling, because they're the ones that are going to carry out this action. The children were taken down from the tractor. They were lined up along the top of the grave and shot so that they fell into it. The Ukrainians did not aim at any particular part of these children's bodies. The wailing was indescribable. I particularly remember a small fair-haired girl who took me by the hand. She too was shot later. Those who carried out the action were obviously given a promotion. These are grown men, right, arguing over who should kill kids under the age of 5, which is always, it's always good to remember. This is what the Nazis were ultimately about. This is the, you know, sometimes we lose sight of what Nazism and fascism is, especially Nazism, because of, you know, the movies and the books and the kind of interest that people have in this topic. But this is what Nazism is about. It's about grown men murdering innocent children who have no parents with them. It's one of the most grotesque acts I guess you'll ever hear of. So it's hard to think that the Holocaust is not underway by this point when such a grievous act has taken place. It's hard to obviously comprehend this. The question is, you know, was this part of a systematic plan? It seems like it. It almost fits in with what Goldhagen says, that there was a stepwise implementation. Kill parents, kill Jews, kill men, kill leaders first of all, until you get ready to be able to put yourself in a position mentally where you can kill toddlers. So that evidence supports the intentionalist school, but you have to kind of tie in both Friedlander's story and the analysis of Goldhagen, which you'll find on my City Phase 3 chapter. Okay, last couple of sources. I'm not going to run through these in detail. You're going to do this in your own time. These sources can be found here. And what you want to think about here is, I'll kind of give you the answers right without running through the sources. The first source is from leader of the ghetto in Germany, right, or a place called Vaterland. When I say Germany, right, Vartigau was actually part of Poland. The Germans had obviously taken control of this territory and were going to make it part of Germany. There are still Jews, right, living in this ghetto in what used to be Poland. And Hopner, right, who's the guy who writes the letter to Adolf Eichmann, who's one of the key figures in the implementation of the Holocaust. He writes a letter saying, look, what am I going to do with all my Jews? I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I've got some who are working, I'm making money with them. Should we sterilise female Jews? Some Jews might die of hunger during the winter. And Matthias doesn't really want to, the Hopner doesn't really want to answer these questions without some kind of information from Eichmann. So that evidence might support Matthias, because this is from July 1941, and this top Nazi, at least in Poland, Hopner has got no clue whatsoever what to do with the Jews. So that might support the structural school. Source 825 also might support the structural school. It's a little memo between Goering and Heydrich, so you might want to have a read of that and see what you make of it. We can always discuss that again. And then sources 826 and 827 are straightforward. They don't necessarily support the structural school. They're more likely to support the intentional school, but they can be easily evaluated, right? So again, just take your time, think for a few minutes about what each school is about, what's the kind of 2 points supporting the intentional school, or what are the 2 main aspects of the intentional school, what are the 2 main aspects of the structural school. Don't rush this, and then read sources 824, 825, 826, 827, and try and, you know, by this point you should be aware, try and make or do this yourself. And if you can do this yourself, if you can make clear in your head what each school kind of is about, then you should be able to use this primary source evidence in your assessment in order to truly make sure that you can grasp and make sense of each historical interpretation. There is, right at the very end of the Phase 3 online chapter, there is a little quiz, and it's a quote matching. So I've got intentional structuralist, and you just have to kind of place intentionalist and structuralist next to a sequence of quotes. And these quotes are from different historians, either intentional or structuralist historians, and you want to see if you can match them up. If you can do that, then you're going to be absolutely fine for this assessment, because you'll know exactly what each school is about and what evidence you can then apply to support in each school. When we have a tutorial on this topic area, we will get an opportunity to discuss in detail what each school is really about and what evidence might be applied to support each historical interpretation. But I've spoken for quite a while now, right, and I don't want to go on too much. I guess the one thing which I haven't really spoken about is the Holocaust itself. So I'm just going to give you very briefly a couple of words on this. We have actually started talking about the Holocaust itself, right? Because once Jewish kids have been murdered in such a brutal way by the military, right, the Holocaust is underway, and that's August 1941. But the extermination camps do not appear until 1942. We have a conference known as the Wannsee Conference, which takes place in January of 1942, and it's at that conference that a decision was made to round up all the Jews in Europe, in occupied Nazi Europe, so that's, you know, the Netherlands, and that's France, and that's in Germany, and you send them east, and you send them to these places that I've mentioned. I've added 2 other camps here. Malé Trosteniks was another camp where the Holocaust did take place. Sajmište, number 8, was an extermination camp in former Yugoslavia. We tend to think about the main 6, that's the first 6 that were in Poland, and obviously Auschwitz was where over 1 million Jews were killed, and Treblinka was where close to 1 million were killed. This is where the gas chambers, where all of these killings took place in Nazi-occupied Poland. And this is, I guess, what we tend to think about in regards to the Holocaust. You actually don't have to discuss any of this information in an assessment, other than maybe context in your introduction, where you can refer to, you know, 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, this is how the majority of them were killed, and so on and so forth, and, you know, this appalling systematic murder, horrific conditions in these extermination camps, which, as you know, are different than the concentration camps which existed in Germany, where there were no gas chambers that carried out gassings. And you can use this for context, but in terms of an assessment on this, you only have to focus on that point up until kind of 1941, whatever month that might be, when you think a decision can be made. Yes, it was late on in 41, which would support the structural school, or a definite decision had been made before the 22nd of June 1941, sorry, which would support the intentionalist school. So that's all. I won't go on anymore, and we can discuss these points in greater detail at the tutorial. Thank you.